I ask you in relation to the Ulster Bank accounts that transferred, eventually ended up with NatWest. I know this wasn't on your agenda, but it's just something that I'm reading about in the Financial Times and other publications, and watching what's going on in the UK and the allegations that are being made regarding the Ulster Bank secretly lodging potentially enormous liabilities against the SMEs, some of them Northern Ireland, some of them Southern Ireland. So, and some of these allegations are coming from a former head of capital at the RBS. And these accounts ended up with the Global Restructuring Group. So, have you got a sight of that? Are you concerned about the Irish customers within those banks? Have you sought information on it? And how will you proceed?
So, Deputy, if this is a matter, I don't have up-to-date information on this, but this is a matter that we've actually discussed a number of years ago before this committee in Ulster Bank GRG issue, where an external independent review was commissioned in the UK, and a look at the approach in Ireland was also looked at, where customers who were in scope a scheme was set up and the matter was addressed. I certainly recall discussing this here at this committee before, and I just don't have precise up-to-date information on that, but it is a matter that was a supervisory concern to us. We looked at the report in the UK, the approach that was taken, the scope, and any issues of concern that arose, whether those issues arose in Ireland and customers were dealt with. A scheme together with an opportunity for complaints to be made was put in place and overseen, and I'm happy to provide you in writing with up-to-date information, because
if you would just look at what's being reported now,
yes,
in a number of publications, and what's being reported in terms of what the whistleblowers would have said and what the UK is now finding, I think that it's a whole new complaint. Or
yes.
So therefore, yeah. If you
so I'm happy to take it away, but I can say from memory, and that the issues that were present in the UK were not found to be present here.
No, that was back. That was back.
That was back in the original issue. But yeah, I'm very happy to come back to you and update on that.
Because, as I said, you know, they're looking at an inquiry now. They mentioned the UK. They mentioned the accounts in Northern Ireland, and indeed the Southern Irish accounts. And I'd like to get an up-to-date on it, because it would appear
happy to
that
update you.
There's a difference in what happened before and what's going on now. I've raised on many occasions the tied agents issue and the AIB, and I want to raise that in the context too of the Belfry investments. So we had a meeting here where evidence was given in relation to Belfry. We had it in private session. There was a whistleblower involved, and we decided to pursue the matter after we had heard the detail of Belfry investments, how many there actually is, and how many then customers were involved in, should they get paid. Now, the bank resisted, and eventually, I presume because of the threat of public hearings by this committee, they agreed to pay some of the Belfry investors to refund them their money and compensation and so on. Have you examined that, or examined the two issues rather? One, the Belfry funds, the investment funds, and two, the EBS tied agent issue, because both are an example of bad practice by the bank, being continued in the case of EBS, being continued through a 12.5-year period. So what's your role in relation to both of those issues? Because both would seem to be wrongdoing by the bank And as a regulator, what is your view on it and what action can you take?
So, Deputy, I will deal with the EBS tied agent issue by saying I know that that matter has been previously raised by yourself on a number of occasions, the subject of correspondence and discussion with the bank, and I am happy to come back to you on that. I can say more precisely on the Belfry issue.
No, but on the EBS one, when you say come back to us, what's your role in that?
But
there's a potential, exposure there for AIB in relation to the tied agents. Do they have to report this? The bank have to report this to you? Can you ask questions of the bank in relation to why it has taken them 12.5 years? And yes, come back with the information, but as a guideline for me, what is the role of the central bank on that issue?
So I don't have to hand all the details around what that issue is with the tied agent, because there was a myriad of issues raised. I think there was litigation raised to do with businesses and other issues as well. So, Deputy, because I want to be precise and accurate with the information I give you, I simply want the opportunity to go back and refresh the information to give it to you in an accurate format, because I also know there was litigation involved in that. So there's a number of issues from different perspectives. So I simply want the chance to be precise.
That's fine. There was litigation involved in it, but there was also mediation put in place. And now, instead of that mediation coming to it, to bring closure to it for the EBS tied agents, mediation seems to have stalled, and depending on which side you speak to, you'll get a different view on that mediation. But I'll wait for you to come back to me, but I will finish by saying that surely to God, the regulator has some sight of what's going on here, and please bring us up to date with what actions.
We'll have some, to use your words, we'll have some sight of what's going on. Like Derval, I'm not completely up to date on this. I know, I haven't, what I could tell you is that for quite a period I was hearing quite a lot about it, and I haven't heard quite a lot about it for a while. But we'll come back.
It hasn't gone away.
We'll come back to you.
And it's worse as getting. But anyway,
we'll come back
to
the
Belfry investments.
Okay.
Then,
So the Belfry investments, you, I'm sure, know there were various tranches of investment sold, and at the time there were limited regulatory requirements in place. We're going back quite a number of years now, and there was also litigation in that case, and an outcome where AIB were found. I think there was liability to some of the customers, and of course with this committee and others a scheme was set up to deal with all of the customers, not just the litigation. So we were engaged with AIB from a consumer or retail investor participation point of view, but straightforwardly I'll tell you, because of the passage of time, we didn't have a power to compel AIB to set up a redress scheme, but we used our view that a consumer-centric approach should be put in place, and we had detailed supervisory engagement in terms of the fact that the characteristics of an approach should be fair. We used some of the experience in the tracker mortgage examination, the characteristics of a redress scheme, and in effect 3 categories were determined by them, which seemed fair to us, for unsuitable sales, for suitable sales but with errors in it, and then for suitable sales. And we challenged them on the categorisation, we challenged them on some of their approaches, etc. So we had extensive engagement with them behind the scenes to try to make sure that the design and the execution was as fair as possible to the customers.
But the decisions... They have not covered all of the Belfry investments.
They have...
the various schemes, Belfry 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. My understanding is that they have not covered all of the investments, and I want to know, what can you do about that? And were you not surprised when, now that we know that you had that sort of insight into this issue, that there was no documents? Documents had vanished?
Well, there's a couple of issues going on. There were documents in some cases and not in others.
In quite a large amount of cases.
And that is one of the issues that we took issue on, because there's two ways to read a lack of documentation, which is to say that generally speaking things would have been done fine, but actually that was one of the areas that we challenged on, which is any absence of documentation, then the customer should have the benefit of that absence, i.e. the benefit of the doubt goes to the customer where they cannot demonstrate that the sale was suitable. And this is, am I not surprised? Sometimes I am not surprised with the lack of documentation, particularly when you're going back to investments that were made in 2002 to 2006. I'm not saying it's right, but having the unfortunate role of investigating banks out of the legacy period, it has been the case that number one, they don't have document retention requirements, and it does happen.
I can't believe you're saying that, because, you know, documents are meant to be retained, particularly by a big bank like that. They claimed, my understanding is, that there was no documentation for a vast number of these cases, particularly the document that would refer to the compatibility of this particular product for the individual that they were dealing with. But yet, the whistleblower had all the documents. I just think it's unbelievable. And therefore, like, when you go into a bank, it raises the question just how much information you're actually given, or how much information you can beat out of these banks using the muscle that you have. And then you get this line, oh, there's no documents, but we're going to settle everything anyway. I just think it shows, one, that the employees of the bank were put into a position where they had to tick boxes qualifying these investors, but they knew damn well that they weren't informing the investor. And then when you go and investigate it, lo and behold, the documents are not available. But they settled a lot of those cases, is my understanding, and there are still cases outstanding. So if the banks had changed their culture and approach, you would imagine that in relation to Belfry and the EBS tied agent issue, that they'd come up front. If there'd any fear of the central bank, they'd come up front and show you what's happening.
Deputy, there's a lot of various issues raised there. I can say that Belfry, the document issue, they should have their documents. I'm not going to stand apologetically for banks when they don't come up to scratch. That's a matter for them, and we certainly have rigorous expectations around this. This is a matter going back before the code, the Consumer Protection Code was in place. It's a matter arising from 2002 to 2006. So that'll be a matter for the institution about their own documents arising from that period. But what I am clear about is that when we engaged with them, we were perfectly clear, we expect you to produce the documentation. Where you don't, the customer gets the benefit of the doubt on that. So we were clear that any customer where the Know Your Client or any of the assessments weren't there, then the customer got the benefit of that. And that was one of the areas that we focused on, because unless they could demonstrate the suitability of the sale, and if they didn't have the documents to demonstrate that, then one of the approaches in the redress scheme was to say that where they couldn't demonstrate that, the way they should look at the categorisation for the client was to the benefit of the client. And if you have concerns around the administration of this, I don't know about the information you received in private session with the person you're calling a whistleblower, and I don't know what documentation they brought to you, nor could I know. But I'm very happy, as I say, because the team engaged extensively on this, because even though it was outside of our powers and our role, because we take our view of treating your customer and your retail investors seriously, we were demanding on this. I'm very happy if you have concerns around scope or anything else for you to provide that information to us, and as part of our engagement we can consider that.
I'm concerned about the balance of the Belfry investors and how they're going to be dealt with. And I'm concerned about the EBS. So you'll come back to us on both of them.
And if you could tell me the particular concern on the Belfry investor, I'm very happy to.
Lack of paperwork.
Well, but you also said there was a scope issue. I think you.
Oh yeah, in terms of whether the person making the investment was fully informed and whether he was, that the investment was compatible with his finances, and whether he was given the knowledge around the investment itself.
Yes, and I'm in complete agreement with you, because the three categories in the redress scheme is compensation and full refund for customers where there was an unsuitable sale. And that is one of the categories, the first category in the redress scheme. So we're in full agreement that customers where the sale was unsuitable, they have promised to give them a full refund of the investment, including time value of money.
We'll await your update then.
Thank you.
In relation to the sale of loans to vulture funds, so the sale of a loan to a vulture fund, all of the paperwork and all of the commitments in relation to this case, a case of any kind, goes to the vulture fund. So that vulture fund then, if there has been a decision in court that legal fees should have been paid by the bank that sold it, is it the bank or the vulture fund? I'm presuming it is the bank. And the evidence that I have is that in a number of cases with the same bank, they have refused to honour their commitments to the customer, some arising from a court case, and they say it's the vulture fund. Substantial money involved in it. Yeah. Customers pushed out again to try and have a fight with the bank. And the bank, of course, all it has to do nowadays is to stonewall the customer, particularly if they're not in this jurisdiction anymore. So what I want to know is, in an instance like that, in a case like that, what role has the central bank in that, in ensuring that the bank that sold the loan honours the obligations it had when it had the loan?
Yeah, I will come back to you on that, because it's only last night that I was made aware of an issue, of this issue. I think it's the one you're describing. So I don't know enough to answer you now. I mean, one of my answers would be it depends on the contract between the bank and the fund that it sold it to.
No, the court decided this.
But
and the original.
Sorry, we're now speculating. All I'm saying, that's what I would have said. But why don't we take that away, another one to take away, and come back to you on?
And have you many complaints from customers of banks who have had their loans sold to vulture funds? Have you many complaints from those customers as to how they're treated or being treated? If they wrote to the central bank, how would you deal with those complaints? Do you register the numbers you have? Have you any at all?
Complaints about?
Vulture funds.
So I can come back and we can give you more precise information. We would look at complaints about the non-bank sector from 2 points of view at least. One of them is anyone who contacts the central bank directly or through their representatives. We record that. We bring it into the supervisory teams. We look at those issues. But we also go out and inspect and meet the firms themselves. And then we will look at their own data about what their customers are complaining directly to them. We also monitor social media, for example, to see what people might be saying online about behaviours or practices, and we get other feeds that give us our intelligence around issues in the system and risk. So it's directly telling us, we take that into account and give you some information about that. We get information from people such as yourselves who are in a position where you talk to an awful lot of people and can hear intelligence or commentary, and the firms themselves. We particularly expect them to look at their own complaints data. We look at that for trend analysis. We bring it together at system level and firm level. So we have a myriad of levels of information that we gather. And through other connections with society as well, we will listen and take all of that. So there's multiple ways for us to hear intelligence.
I attended a meeting of the board of the Irish Banking and Culture Board last week, I think. And I was shocked to hear Pádraig Kazan tell me that some of the cases, harrowing cases that we heard at this committee in the very beginning of the tracker mortgage issue had still not been resolved. Now, I know you don't deal with individual cases. He wasn't dealing with individual cases. But the day that they were before us, they poured out their life story to us. And it took everyone, I think, in this committee by surprise at the level of information that they put out about themselves and the difficulties that they had. You couldn't help but be moved by the stories that they had told, the experiences that they had with the bank, how it affected their lives, how they lost everything, how they lost homes, and so on. And for Pádraig Kazan to say that, because he was the one that we were dealing with and they were his clients, to tell us that they have not been resolved as yet, it just shows you how bad I think the banks are in dealing with some of these cases. Is there no urgency that you can bring to the banks on issues? Go back to the EBS, 12.5 years, go back to the tracker mortgage issue, the destruction of a person's life and well-being, and still they're not resolved. So, how many more tracker mortgages do you think have to be dealt with?
So I can say from a central bank point of view, I am very concerned to hear that any of those cases have not been dealt with, because part of our approach has been to ensure that customers were identified, that remediation and compensation were paid, that the appeals procedures that are available to people were working, and that the money was being handed over to customers. So I recognise there are cases being dealt with by the Financial Services Ombudsman that fell and fall outside of the scope of tracker mortgage redress, but we have been active and vigilant about making sure that people got their dues. I'm not saying it would make good the harm that was done, but I would actually like specific details around that, because we have been vigilant to follow through. And as you know yourself, you know, a vast amount of customers were identified and have received their money. So I particularly remember following up on the cases of the people who came before this committee, because it was totally unsatisfactory that people not only had the experience but then came and shared the real sensitive details of their lives in public if they haven't been remediated. If these cases are in a different system like the Ombudsman system, I will have no direct ability to deal with that. But if they're in the tracker mortgage examination, I will find that very unsatisfactory and deal with it as a priority.
Do you know how many, could you tell the committee how many unresolved cases that there is in relation to each of the banks? Do you know that figure? And do you know the figure of the cases still being dealt with by the Ombudsman?
I am certain that 744 million has been paid out to 42,000 customers to date.
But the ones that have not been done.
And I believe, as far as I'm concerned, they all have been paid to date. There are 38 unresolved complaints in the system. I have, before the Ombudsman, 2,713 cases have been lodged with 1,101. These are just information that I have yet to be decided. There are 200 active cases still before the courts, and a number of cases have been rejected before the Ombudsman. They'll be able to give their own figures in more detail, but this is an area where we have been vigilant in following through.
How many would be in each of the banks?
I don't have a breakdown, but I would expect that most of...
sorry, can I just check?
You can give us those figures.
Were the cases that he was... Do you know whether the cases he was referring to were, which he described as unresolved, whether they were in the courts or in the Ombudsman? Did he actually...
I would come back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah. With the exact detail.
And I'm happy to come back to you, but redress and compensation is yet to be completed in 155 accounts because most of those customers cannot be contacted. And there may be a small number of new identified customers, but under no circumstances do I expect cases that are long in scrutiny to be unresolved in the system that the central bank is responsible for, and we do track this in great detail.
So you'll come back to me with the numbers in each of the banks.
We'll come back to you with what we know.
And if you can tell me, please,
I will,
Deputy, the information you have so we can square it off, because that would be very unsatisfactory.
I'll do that. You wrote to the committee then, arising from an issue I raised with you about accounting standards. So, are you satisfied now that that these standards are being met? That the regulations set down by the European Union, that the accountancy bodies are ensuring that their members are using that European Union standard, and that they're not being advised to do otherwise? This is your letter of the 9th of June. I was referring a long time before that. I asked you to reply to, I think it was an Irish Times or a Financial Times article in relation to the non-compliance, if you like, of banks relative to EU regulations.
My letter indicated that we were satisfied, but clearly...
You were satisfied then. I'm asking you, are you satisfied now that there is no evidence there to say that the accountancy firms are giving advice contrary to the European Union regulations?
I haven't, I'm not aware of any evidence that would make me to be not satisfied. I will double check if there is anything, but I've seen nothing that would change my letter to you, basically.
But you will check?
I will check.
Because this is a recent complaint that I have received. In terms of...
could you share that complaint with us?
Sorry?
Can you share that complaint
with
us?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you.
So, Pepper then, they have 80,000, is it, mortgages? They're one of the biggest mortgage holders anyway on private houses. And, you know, we're told that there's a wide range of options on offer from the vulture funds to deal with issues of the customer not being able to pay. But my information from, and again I can send you on individual cases, is that they are still being treated badly, that some of the range of options are just not compatible with the client's profile and ability to repay or to pay. Getting a problem resolved with any of these vulture funds is really difficult for a customer and even more difficult for the likes of me. And it can also be said that they just won't come before the committee. Like, who's going to take control of them? Who is going to regulate them? And who is going to stand up for the customers that they continue to harass? And from the cases that I have seen, it is harassment. So I'm turning to the central bank, and if you say you don't have the remit to do that, do you suggest to the government at any time as to what they might do in terms of legislation to give you the authority to deal more significantly with the vulture funds? I'm just taking a note here. One of the key issues that emerged in terms of our hearings with MABS and FLAC and so on was that consumers, what the difficulty consumers had in engaging with the investment funds. So it's not much, I'm not just saying it from hearsay. They're saying it from their engagement with their customers. And they told us here at committee that that was the experience.
Deputy, there's a couple of things in what you're saying. First of all, it's true that customers were experiencing difficulty engaging with some of their lenders. Some of those are for reasons that it's a really stressful time and administratively they didn't know who to talk to. So actually, it's really welcome that the approach developed with MABS, rolled out and promoted by the BPFI, is there with named people to engage with, so that somebody in MABS, for example, can phone a named person in one of the non-bank lenders or any lender to be able to advocate on behalf of somebody, so they know who to talk to, so they're not chasing around different people finding information. That's really helpful. Any information you have about harassment, we have powers to deal with, because we're very clear on our expectations. So if you give us specific information, we follow through. I welcome that information. And as for appearances before this committee, we have been very clear over a number of years about the dissatisfaction of the non-bank lenders not appearing before this committee. You have asked us to communicate that to them. We have, and I recently was at a meeting with the Minister for Finance with all of the lenders, the banks and the non-banks, just a few weeks ago, where he made very clear his expectation that everybody should attend before the Oireachtas committees when invited to do so. I heard him tell them that, and he said that loud and clear. We support that message as well. That is a little outside of our direct power, but there are things within our powers, and definitely within our powers is any behaviour that amounts to harassment or inappropriate communication with people. We definitely can take action, and we welcome information.
Do you get individual complaints into the central bank in relation to voucher funds? I think I asked you this already.
You asked me that, and yeah. I said we do, and I also outlined the myriad of sources of complaint and risk and data information that we take to inform our work, so we can look closely at behaviour and take effective action where that's needed.
Well, I'm sure the members will agree that we should contact the voucher funds again on foot of what the Minister for Finance has told them and issue the invitation and see will they come before us. That might be a way.
Take their licence off them if they don't appear before democratically elected members.
Just two other things on the bank IT glitches. Are the systems robust enough now to withstand further IT glitches?
A key area of concern for us as regulators is resilience of the banking system, and their IT infrastructure has been, is and will be of critical importance more and more with digitalisation. The SSM, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, it's a key priority focus, and we certainly think the Irish banking system has considerable work to do to make continued need for progress in this area. The recent events that have come up through a number of banks. There's more work to be done. It's not at the standard that we expect. There were consumer-facing issues and clearly they shouldn't have happened. Customers are entitled to expect continuous, reliable service. But it's also fair to say that millions of transactions a day happen in Ireland in the banking system with no problems arising. So, we want to have confidence in our banking system to work for us, but we do think that more work is to be done. And in Europe, there's a continued and ever-increasing focus on this, with more regulation, with DORA, which is Digital Operational Resilience, is a new area of focus, because all big businesses run on their IT systems, and most businesses interact with their customers in a digital interface. It's more and more important.
Does that include hacking?
certainly cyber resilience and resistance to hacking is a key part of that, and it has, just because of the way the world has moved, it's an increased threat, not just in the banking sector, but in all sectors actually, and of course it is a key area of priority. I don't know if the Governor or Vaz would like to add to that.
Cyber is a major area of focus across the board indeed, yeah.
The last matter I want to bring to your attention.
I just wanted a small point to add to what Derval just said, which is that we in the central bank are actually playing a pan-European role in this operational, digital operational resilience work. So it's important to us, and it's important to the whole regulatory community.
The last issue I want to mention to you is the politically exposed persons. We've just completed a report, which we'll publish later, on the PEPs issue. And TDs are, subjected to it. The staff in our offices, and then you can go on to family members and extended family members and so on. And as soon as they hear you're a public representative, it's like, it's a dirty word. And suddenly you have another 20 pages or something to fill out. And I want to ask, are all of the banks and credit unions and so on, are they all acting on what the central bank has asked them to do relative to PEPs? Have you set out just exactly who these people are in PEPs? And what they need to do in relation to a politically exposed person?
Can I just point out that I'm one of these as well?
Oh yeah, I know that, yeah.
This is actually legislation coming from Europe and government level, and the guidelines around this are Department of Justice issued guidelines. So the rule framework, correct. The rule framework, I mean, we're a very important overseer of effective integrity controls for the financial system to prevent the proceeds of crime and financial crime. But the legislation is devised at Commission level, at government level, and then the guidelines. How it's operated, we have a lot to say about that, but those in prominent public functions and the PEP legislation, it comes from, we don't set all of the rules, but of course we look at the effectiveness of controls and approaches of lenders, so we have an influence in frequency of testing, etc. But the rule framework is set separately.
So you're just overseeing what someone else has written. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
We don't write the PEP framework. The central bank is a key player in a lot of ways, but we don't write the legislation.
Do you think that the general purpose of PEPs, do you think that should be extended to all of the citizens of the country?
Of the country?
I have a view.
You have a view?
I have a view, which I don't think so, because I don't think it's effective. Money laundering and every other kind of system is a risk-based system. So it would not make sense to dissipate resources everywhere because we can't do everything well all at once. So I think a more targeted risk-based approach makes sense in a lot of walks of life, including this.
If you look at it in a slightly different way, it does apply to the whole country in the sense that the financial institutions, banks need to apply know your customer rules. So at one level, and what the PEP rules are just a heightened version of rules that apply to everybody. But did you say that there's a report coming from?
I'm just finishing a report.
Is it this committee or just?
Committee, yeah.
Well, we look forward to reading it.
Yeah. Okay.